All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Jared here. Dave's not here tonight. He is on an airplane flying somewhere, doing whatever he does on an airplane, probably like taking his shoes and socks off and putting it between the seat backs against the shoulder of the poor individual in front of him. But we're on tonight with D. Gray. D is running for Utah Rep seat 44, correct?
That's correct.
All right, D. Well, go ahead and give us a rundown on why you're the optimal candidate for that seat.
Thank you. So my name's Dee. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a trans non-binary person running on kindness. So my website's D Gray for kindness. The point of kindness is difficult. It's hard to be kind. It's easy to be nice, but it's hard to be kind. And that platform, I think, is the platform that people in my district care about. It's a platform focused on fairness and feedback and collaboration. And in the end, out here, my neighbors, we want to talk, right? We want to have the ability to be engaged with each other again and have better relationships. But we have a hard time with kindness, with that ability to accept and process feedback and try and learn from our mistakes. And I want to take that feedback message to my district to help them understand that it's our responsibility to provide feedback to our representatives, that it's our responsibility. It's no one else's responsibility for us to make our government. We make it. So we the people means you, not legislatures. And we're not holding our legislatures accountable. When we pass multiple ballot initiatives that the legislature then turns around and remakes, it shows a very distinct message that they don't actually care about what the voters want. This is our responsibility then to provide them feedback that they should listen. Yeah.
Let's dig in on that ballot initiatives passed that the legislatures ignored. Honestly, dig in a little deeper on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And please let me know if my Wi-Fi gets weird and I can slow down. But the three initiatives, we had an expansion of welfare, Medicare, that we as a ballot initiative passed that was ignored.
Did that pass statewide, or was that when was this passed? Do you have any information on that bill?
I can go and find it.
How about let's skip that one. You find that later and send that on to me. I'd like to dig into that a little more.
Absolutely. We had the ballot initiative for medical marijuana that the legislature had to come in and change to the point where it then broke. They made it so only state agents could actually sell, but state agents wouldn't be able to sell because it is federally illegal. So we had to spend money to rewrite it and then spend money to rewrite it again.
Yeah, that's the one that strikes me the hardest. Of course, that one fits in nicely with our DABC laws, which is something that we commonly rail against pretty hard on this show. Yeah.
And that's the thing that I really feel like I'm trying to help people recognize. In the end, we have a supermajority in the legislature right now. There's nothing that the current legislatures need to do, no one to convince to pass any of their legislation. And we do see that Utahns are overall pretty supportive of reproductive rights. Utahns are overall pretty not super excited about having really highly controlled alcohol, controlling us, deciding what we can and can't drink, are things that a lot of us have been raised on these very individual choice values, like I have, that we don't align with a lot of the things that the legislature is passing right now. But a lot of times I just hear, well, that's just the way politics is. But it's not. We choose how politics are. And so if we want our politicians to be accountable, we don't make excuses for them because they're part of our party. We primary them. And if that doesn't work, we vote for the other party. I'm not going to be able to change the Utah Constitution to all of a sudden do anything crazy. But what I can do is provide another voice, another opportunity for someone to be able to represent a different viewpoint that needs the ability to be collaborated with. And I really believe in collaboration. I believe 90% of what we all value is the same. And that the last 10%, we could actually probably find something in there that we could just say, yeah, this actually works for all of us. But right now we feel like in order to maintain our edge in our politics, we have to pit everything against each other. So even when we spend months trying to pass good legislation, we'll then turn around and not pass that legislation and instead put in something completely brand new. And that's the third one. And that is the third of the ballot initiatives was the introduction of the redistricting committee. That made it so we have a heavily gerrymandered state now. And the response from the governor was, okay, vote for someone that cares. And so that's what I'm saying is we have to care. Vote for someone that's going to actually require that the party play ball at all with its citizens.
Yeah. I've heard a lot about this gerrymandering incident that went on. I haven't dug into it much because I'll be honest, we don't stand alone, and neither party stands alone in guilt on gerrymandering. Every state right now, every state, the dominant party is facing this same accusation in every state. The big one, the one that's, I think, biggest on the national stage is New York State. And I saw a map of their gerrymandering, and you can't make heads or tails of it. But I've said it before. I'd like to see us figure out, say that we have voting blocks that are perfectly square and you can only move a straight line side to side. And
I think there's a lot of ways to solve the problem of how we find our representation in a way that is fair. But we do know right now with I don't know if you've seen that. There's this very cool YouTube video where someone shows through 6 simple iterations of an algorithm that person wrote by themselves. So it's not even the best algorithm out there that changed a pretty 50-50 split to 75-25, right? And so those kinds of moves, I'm completely with you. Every time someone tries to call out that side, well, they go, well, I'm just defending myself from what the other side's doing. And I think what we all have to tell our representatives is we don't care. Yeah. What we care about is good representation. And if you can't provide it, we're going to vote for someone else that will. I think there's lots of ways we could do it, from changing voting process to proportional representation, which would allow way more parties, to simply creating a more fair, balanced way to make that map that represents and gives us representation for our actual state. Yeah. We don't have that representation in our legislature, and it's gonna get worse.
Yeah, the that medical marijuana bill that came out, what was it, 6 years ago? Like maybe even longer, maybe a decade ago now. When that got shot into the ground, that really chapped me. And not even that I myself would probably never find myself in a circumstance to use it, but just to see the populace come out overwhelmingly for it, and the legislature essentially ignored it and then threw up roadblocks and everything else, that irked me.
And I actually do have the opportunity to be able to use this law still. And the registration process is by far the darkest design patterns I have ever seen. It is impossible to navigate that website. And
is this to
I know that's
register for medical marijuana?
indeed, which you have to do every 6 months.
Really?
Yes. And it is absolutely, the process is hidden. It's not even, but I think you could also just chalk that up to no investment, right? In the end, if we want our government to be effective, we have to invest in it. And in the end, I think a lot of us want our government to be effective in a lot of ways.
I'm more on the side of because I'm frugal, especially when it comes to the government spending other people's money. Because let's face it, they haven't done a good job yet. So I'm more on the side of let's just legalize marijuana and let the cards fall where they may. I know I get pushback from friends and family members saying, well, we can't test for it on roads or whatever. Okay, so we can't pull over and give someone a DUI for marijuana. But if they do get into an accident, we can enhance their punishment if it comes up that they have THC in their system. And that can just be, one of those kind of idle threats out there. So don't smoke and drive, or gummy bear and drive, whatever. But I'm all about enhancing liberty, but I think with liberty, you've got to hand out responsibility. Another thing I wanted to ask about, and this is a interesting talk about the DABC. Right now, we're under a, dare I say, socialist alcohol dispensary system in the state of Utah. When socialism fails, it's notoriously awful. So how, if we were to end the DABC, what steps could we take to ensure that connected people don't then gain control of that fairly lavish market? Because
by connected people,
historically,
you give me
well, I'll give you circumstantial evidence. Historically, when socialism fails, connected people gain control of the lucrative markets, such as communist Russia. When it failed, all the oligarchs and upper echelon of the KGB took dominant control of any profitable market. How do we control for that if we were, by the love of God, if we were able to get rid of the DABC?
I think this is a really interesting question, and I don't mean to meme myself, but I also wonder if we're asking the wrong question. Are we sure that's not where we would land no matter what?
Could be.
When we look at a lot of the food we make, the internet we consume, the news we consume, most of those are in the exact same position you're talking about, where the people that are connected have the largest influences in those spaces. So I don't know.
Were those people connected before they got the influence in those spaces, or did they gain the influence because did they become connected because of those places? I think is the big question there.
It's absolutely. And I think it's also fair to recognize that most of the time, I think in any system that has a hierarchy as its base, we will find that the people that have the power in politics also have the money. And so no matter what, if you're talking rich people, are going to gain, connected and rich people are going to gain access to these markets. They're going to gain access to these markets and they're going to control them because they have the capital to do so. And we're seeing it even all the way down to local news stations are now being conglomerated into single ownerships. So we have to recognize any system when it fails is terrible. It hurts a lot of people.
I'm okay with the rich person buying the liquor store and paying the citizens of Utah back that investment that they made. What I would be less okay with is the government shutting out that purchase so it can be controlled who it's handed to, so that the person they select gets it, even possibly at a loss for the state.
You're looking at it not as, hey, let's let this become a free market.
But no, I want it to be a free market.
No, I know.
Yeah.
The concern is that it wouldn't become a free market,
yes,
and then instead would be handed to, I don't know, someone that wants to be able to control that substance for some reason, and they would be able to decide who gets it and when and how.
Or not just that, or they're a connected person in the legislature that has, say, the ear of a lot of House seats. And so they're kind of allowed to run away with it, and no free market is involved in how it gets doled out.
And I think we see some markets like that, like our internet markets, right? We see a single ownership that is also heavily regulated, not in favor of us, of the citizens. But I feel like we just answered that question, right? As a legislature coming in and saying, hey, if we are to get rid of this, if we are to relinquish this control, here's how we structure that. We structure that these shops, the inventory is up for sale as a shop, or however that group of people know how to do these things. I shouldn't be the one that says, here's how you sell a liquor store. There's people that know how to sell and buy liquor stores. We will work with those people to say, what's the best way for us to get the best investment out of where we were in this space, knowing that in a free market, these areas are going to be very, very lucrative at the beginning because they have inventory, they have location, and people will come there quicker. And so, now we control prices in a more effective way. Because right now our pricing structure is crazy.
Yeah, I don't drink, so I wouldn't know. No, you're right. I like that. I do worry, as a student of history, I've studied, especially when socialism has inevitably failed, it always ends up with the collapse that the people who had power in the party just rotate that power out. So the people on the bottom lose every opportunity in life, such as they did in the USSR when it collapsed. I mean, that's how the oil oligarchs, all of them to a man, were party officials, and most of them were KBG colonels or higher. And they became oil oligarchs. Explain that to me, where the people of the USSR were slaves to a system that made that investment that these guys then got to run away with. And that's what I worry about when you have a socialist system. That tends to be how it dissolves.
It feels like we're talking about, a socialist implementation of an area versus a full-on socialist system where all aspects of life. Because I think if we all of a sudden got rid of the DABC and just said it does not exist anymore, and we have no more limits on alcohol at all in anything, I think we'd figure it out. It wouldn't be the fall of society, and we wouldn't all of a sudden see. It's so, to me, I think it's.
I was
no matter what.
I was using a macro example for a micro situation, and maybe that's where I failed. what I
Well,
mean
and that's
is,
what I'm saying is I think that that distinction actually creates a pretty big difference
sure, but
in that.
here's what I would hate to see. I would hate to see a connected person, and I'm not doing this disparaging any House members. I'm friends with a couple of them, and they're decent people, and they all have their own thoughts. But I would hate to see a connected person, let's say a person retiring from public office who has that in, and maybe in a blind bid situation or something like that, they get awarded uh even just a liquor store at a loss to the people of the state, but because that person had the connections, where that's public. Private sales, I think, can be managed any way you want.
Right.
I think public sales, because that is a public sale, has to be completely in daylight.
I completely agree. I think the state should be significantly more transparent than it is currently. I
think transparent to where it's gone. I mean, invisible.
It is, right. It, I'm completely with you, right? And we use excuses all of the time, of people are going to panic, or people are going to respond to this information negatively, or we're going to lose seats if they hear about this. All of those things are really someone saying, I know better, and I don't believe I should face consequences for what I've done. And so I believe every state action, especially at our level, at the state level, should be very open. And the only thing we should limit are the things we're working with the federal government and the military with, right? Obviously, we're not going to change a lot of that, and we don't want to. But here, we should be very clear on who we're getting donations from and from where. And it doesn't make sense to me that we have no limitations on who can donate to a campaign here. And again, the Democrats can't change this, right? The Democrats, even if we wanted to, we would have no ability to actually pass this legislation without collaborating with the Republicans, where the Republicans can pass anything they want without needing to collaborate with anyone. And I think we need to at least fix that problem. And I don't think we can fix that in
How do you fix that in a Republican majority state?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because I think if you look at some of the recent poll numbers,
polls.
Mike Lee's.
Can I say this aloud? If anything has been proven, polls are bullshit. So look at 2016.
If I look at 2016, we had 538 giving Donald Trump, what, a 20% chance?
Yeah. And
okay.
They're the only ones that gave him a chance. When you had news stations who ran the polls saying, "Congratulations, Madam President," and then got shocked that night.
So I have a question for you. Have you played Dungeons and Dragons?
No, but my son and the co-host does. I've seen people play it. That's a game for intellectuals. I am a knuckle dragger.
I think it depends on how you play it. But
take your knuckly draggiest knuckle dragger friend that plays it, and I drag my knuckles way more, I guess.
So I like to use that as an example. D20, right? We roll a 20-sided dice. A natural one means a critical fail. And everyone that's ever played this game talks about their critical fails. We've all gotten them. We've all rolled that dice and gotten a critical fail. That's a 5% chance. Even the bad polls were giving him a 5% chance. We have to recognize that polls are not psychics. They're not here to scry into the future. They're here to say, given the current environment, here's the way this is going to lay out. And so if you have a 5% chance, I know a lot of D&D players that if they're looking at their character and they may be able to roll a 1 and die, this is a fake character. right? So that's not that bad of a chance. It's definitely significantly lower than the other person, but it is not that bad of a chance. And
So is your I don't want to say assertion, but is your belief that the only reason why the Republican Party holds dominance in the state of Utah is because of gerrymandering?
Actually, I do want to shift that. I do think they have a supermajority because of gerrymandering.
Even in the populace, right?
No, what I'm saying is not in the populace do the Republicans have a supermajority, but they have it in the legislature.
Okay, but
And
do you believe that Republicans are a majority of the populace?
I believe they're a majority, but I do not believe they're a supermajority.
Okay,
I look at
what percent majority?
So I'm just going to use this recent poll that doesn't actually paint some of my alliances very well, but does give us a foundation for the conversation. And that is that put Mike Lee at 50% of voters versus 34 for Evan McMullin.
Okay.
Giving Mike Lee a significant advantage. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. All Republicans. The only support he got were from Republicans. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that there's 30% of Republicans that have shifted over to Evan McMullin. Okay. I believe we have way more independents than that. And I believe a lot of those are definitely tired of the way the Republican Party is behaving. And I don't want to say, honestly, the way I was raised, I'd probably be a Republican for a number of reasons. I don't think it's about trying to replace the Republicans with a supermajority of Democrats. It's about having the need for collaboration in the things that we pass. So it's at least fair. So I do believe that there's a majority, but I don't believe that they have the numbers that would warrant the current representation that we have.
So you believe that because of the gerrymandering, they're weighted a little heavier than should be reflected.
And I think what's interesting about that is I do think it's a little heavier, but we also have a cliff, right? If it was, a couple of seats and we still didn't have a supermajority where they still needed to get at least one of the conservative Democrats to agree with them, that would change things. But when we get to that point where there's nothing the other party can do to get them to not pass legislation, then that's a big drop off. It's not a little change. It's a big change.
I see Utah as I do believe that Utah is a Republican ran state, just like, and not to play the whataboutism game, but I've argued this before. If you're going to, we don't stand alone in this. Every state that has a declared color lives like this. The big argument is California. California has more Republicans than any other state in the union. Mm-hmm. And it has a Democrat supermajority.
But I think you're playing with numbers there, right? Because they have that many Republicans because their state is that populous.
That's true.
But
true.
Yet they don't actually have the same level of representation that they should have for that population.
That is true. And this could be because, let's face it. I am not a Republican. I am not a Democrat. If I had to pick one, gun to the head, it wouldn't be Democrats because they preach about everything I stand against in my personal life. No personal responsibility, hoisting all your problems onto everyone else, disarming the populace. I believe I'm a Democrat,
Jared, and I don't believe any of those things.
But the party does.
I haven't talked to anyone in the party that believes those things.
Okay, well, how about I say the National Party preaches it at every convention, at every primary, at every State of the Union. They preach all these things. Now, I will say, and I'm not saying the Republicans turn my stomach as well, because they're all big government hacks. Both sides are. It's just one side is louder about their big government, and I don't think the Republicans are any less big government than the Democrats. They just say they aren't.
That's interesting, because I think another way to put what you said about the way the Democrats approach this situation, both of them are using big government. Both parties are using their money and absolutely bloating our debt. The Democrats are doing it for the citizens.
Are they?
Absolutely.
For the general citizens.
Oh, absolutely.
Where?
Here, let's talk about the recent water bill that we as Democrats had to push, and we still could not get through until we were able to get the legislatures up in helicopters to fly over the lake, and they could see the damage themselves. And that's when our bill passed.
Hoist your petard. Tell us about this water bill.
So our water bill, when we obviously we need huge changes to the way that we're managing our water right now. And this is as simple as the way we bill and pay for water, and allow water rights to be maintained. All of that is used in a way that we know is not effective. We didn't change any of that. We wanted to, but we couldn't get that far. And instead, what we got was additional metering for the state and for, I don't remember some of the other effects. But we started charging for water that we were not charging for before. Okay. And that's it. We've done no actual conversation about how quickly this is all happening, and the fact that these are consequences of the choices we've made before. And so now we must find a way to change our behavior so we can enable better outcomes so our kids can live in this state. And so that Colorado can have its state to live in. Like you said, we are all in this together. And so pushing things like EPA regulations to state and saying that we can't make these large changes is absolutely putting us in the point where we as a state are putting a gun to the head of all of the other states near us, because we refuse to be responsible for our behavior.
Let me ask you a question. And here's one of my heartburn moments with the Democrat Party. Do you believe that unelected officials who are unaccountable should be allowed to write legislation that does not have to pass a majority?
So first of all, I don't think it's fair to say that someone that is doing a job is not unaccountable. But I do get your point that they are not,
because that's what the
directly
ATF
accountable to the democratic process. But we do this kind of everywhere. Making the choice on whether or not to execute an arrest is something that a state agent gets to decide and execute on that in that moment.
Isn't that adjudicated through our, honestly, legislation that has been pre-written, that they have to go before a judge, they have to prove the ponderance of evidence, and then, and only then, a judge signs a warrant, which takes away some of their first of their 10 amendments, takes them away. The law enforcement officer is just a tool of the court. Due process happens there. Now, let's talk about, I don't know, are you familiar with guns at all?
I love guns.
Okay. How do you feel about the ATF every 2 to 4 years changing the rules on what certain guns apply where? After, say, maybe some of your fellow citizens have bought guns, and then the ATF changes the rules, and then that gun's illegal. And then maybe the ATF changes the rule back, and then the person who jumped through hoops or lost money to try to keep up with these rules. How do you feel about stuff like that? Because that's an unelected body that, quite frankly, is half schizophrenic 90% of the time.
Well, and I think I love that half schizophrenic. You look at if you found any company that tried to run itself the way our government tries to run itself, with one side looking to actively make the other side look bad, even if it hurts people, even though we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to, I feel, do what we feel is right. But I also feel that a lot of the times we don't accept the possibility that we may be wrong about what's right, or that there may be multiple ways to view what is right based off of the experiences that you've come from and how that affects you. I'm a huge systems thinker. And as I dove into that and started on a tangent, I lost track of the question. What was the question again, Jared?
I just said, how do you feel about the ATF writing and
Right.
changing and then unwriting and changing every 2 to 4 years the laws?
I feel that when the legislature puts together, here is how something is going to be executed, like our cops, and the rules on how they hire, the rules on those day-to-day policy changes that we would see sergeants making, that we would see, these are all things that absolutely we expect this branch of the government, the executive branch of the government, to be able to do, to be able to execute the legislation that's written. If we have a fear of something like the one you've said, then in that legislation, we can say, hey, you can change the rules however you want, but a purchased gun's a purchased gun. So as soon as someone owns that gun, they can absolutely still take advantage of the buyback program if they want to, but they can also be grandfathered in. But they absolutely can't sell that gun.
Oh, but that isn't the case.
What do you mean?
Well, the change of laws around SBRs. Right now you have the mid-ground. They call them short-barreled rifles, but they're considered a pistol. People put a brace on them. Then the ATF just this year come out with a lot of changes that made that investment. It will make a substantial number of people wake up as felons. I believe in October.
So,
and that's the ATF is writing that law. That's not, I like legislatures that move at glacial speed, because then there's time to hone things up, to dig into the dark corners. But the ATF writes a law. The ATF is unaccountable. The ATF writes a law. You can tell me they're accountable, but when you show me anyone who raided Waco and killed all those people, even, I don't know, maybe have to stand in front of Congress and explain themselves, maybe then I'll believe you. But the ATF does not get held accountable for what they do.
So you have issues about the lack of accountability for state agencies?
No, I have issues with them writing a law. That I don't believe laws should come from the executive branch. I don't believe laws should come from the judicial branch. We have clear and declared responsibilities for each branch. I believe laws should come from the legislative branch, which is what legislative means.
So I want to challenge a little bit on this, because I'm an agile coach. I do business agility coaching, and I help organizations shift from hierarchical command and control structures to organic, team-based, squad-based structures that enable the people that are closest to the problem to make the best decisions. That's what we need more of in our government. It's not, let me control more things, give me more things.
So
you want the
10th Amendment. That's what you're saying. And then
what do you mean?
Beyond that, you want the 9th Amendment. Well, the 10th Amendment states that anything not declared in this Constitution is the responsibility of the states.
Oh,
and then the 9th Amendment.
I want legislation that looks a hell of a lot like 95% of the legislation we've passed for our requirements in this state for education.
Okay.
Those requirements are amazing, passed by Republicans, so thank you very much. And that legislation says, hey, as teachers in these learning groups, you have to teach the best practices as determined by evidence. It is evidence-based best practices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they have to do. And now there's an execution there that allows those people that are educators that spend 4 to 10 to 12 years learning how to manage an education system to enable them to do their job. It doesn't make sense at all to me to say, well, I actually think that that's laws on who, what, and what you teach. And so I need the legislatures to be directly involved in every single piece of material that gets taught to our kids. No one thinks that that's a reasonable approach. We can't do that. We have to enable the people that are closest to the problem. When we create a system that says, hey, your job is to ensure that our citizens are safe while also making sure that we meet the requirements of the Second Amendment as defined by the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted it currently and the way that we have also passed our own legislation. Mm-hmm. Make those things happen is actually just exactly what it is. It's execution. Mm-hmm. It is the executive branch doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Yes, we can say, hey, I feel like it would be way smarter for us to recognize that we should lean on the data from our hospitals and our fire departments and our police departments to determine what our speed limits are. And we just say, hey, keep our communities safe. And then they get to come in and say, okay, this is what makes sense based off of the data we're receiving and what we know as experts in this field.
So you're saying, I guess I can understand part of that. I don't see that the ATF changing the laws every 2 to 4 years applies. But then again, you know.
But so does the past legislation, the actual filed legislation, is there a new thing that just gets like through the House and through the Senate, or are you describing
no, the ATF drew up these guidelines themselves.
And then they pass them themselves?
Oh, well, they're going to enforce them themselves. That's like
they pass legislation. Because you're saying legislation needs to be legislated.
Oh, no.
And I'm trying to...
No, it's not legislation. It's a law that is unlegislated.
It's
okay. Let me compare another one. This one you might like.
Oh, I love it.
And we'll keep going into guns.
And Jared, thank you. This has been super fun.
Oh,
I'm really enjoying this.
I dig a good conversation.
So thank you.
When Donald Trump at that desk wrote a law that banned bump stocks.
What about it?
He wrote a law that banned bump stocks, made people a felon, and I think it was 14 days later. Was that legislation?
That's a very good question, because isn't it also execution of the legislation we already have on how we can control the sale of guns? Don't we already have legislation that
Don't you think that
the executive branch?
Don't you think that legislation should be clear and defined? Should say this is exactly what it is. Broad legislation, all that does is leads to, what was that guy, the Stalin's head of the police, Ballman or something. He said, and I quote, "You show me the man and I'll show you the crime." And if you have legislation that is broad and undefined, that's all you have, is you show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
I don't know the context of that quote. So,
Well, you don't need to know
but-
the context. It's just, legislation, if legislation is broad and undefined, then I think it's faulty. I think you must have precise legislation. Don't you?
And I
Wouldn't you
believe-
rather, if you walk through your town, wouldn't you like to know what laws are pertaining to your town? You work for businesses, right? You make them more efficient.
Mhm.
So you go in and you talk to the CEO, and the CEO says, "This is what I want to see out of my company."
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
Then you have a point to work towards. You have a goal, a mission, right? Now, if you walk in and the CEO is just gruff and just says the company's over there and you fail, is that his fault that you failed, or is it your fault that you didn't get clarification? Where does that go? You know, you need to have a defined network that you're going to work with. You know, I'm not going to hire someone to come fix my house and not explain to them what needs to be fixed. You need to have clear and defined processes.
I think you just gave me a really good example of how impossible that would be. If you're getting someone to come over and fix something, you have no ability to tell them exactly what needs to be done because you are not the expert in that space.
Well, hold on.
You've called the expert. No, hold on.
If the electricity's out in my bedroom and I call an electrician over, I know what's wrong.
Do you?
The electricity's out in my bedroom. That's what I want fixed.
Okay. Now, how exactly is he allowed to fix it? Or she, or they?
Well, it depends. Am I paying them under the table, or are they a certified electrician?
Well, you're going to have to define that up front, all of it.
Yeah, I want
every single step of how that person fixes the problem that you don't or can't fix.
So, okay.
What I'm trying to get at.
Are you arguing you're okay with broad and expansive, undefined legislation?
I'm not okay with broad and expansive and undefined legislation. What I am interested in is highly defined legislation.
Perfect.
Based off of vision and values.
Perfect.
Not rules to stay in the club. When you talk about, I want to be able to walk through my city and know what it is, it feels a lot like I want to know how to make sure I don't break the rules.
Well, let me tell you two reasons why I didn't like Trump signing that bill. One, I don't think any law is supposed to come from that desk. And I stand by that. And two, it was him pandering to gain further acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt it was dishonest on both accounts.
I don't disagree with you. I agree that he should not have been able to pass legislation at that broad of a level. If we had a requirement that, and I'm glad that we don't, I'm not proposing this, that all of the gun sales were being only sold at federal stores, cool. Now the executive branch has the ability to make and control that experience. But we don't. I don't want that. I want something very different. But what I'm trying to get at is if we align on vision and value and then create legislation that measures outcomes, not outputs, then we enable our people, we the people, to do their best job wherever they're doing it. And that may mean that the rules change, but we can also recognize, hey, how often are rules changing and how do we reduce the impact and make that part of the vision and part of the mission and part of the measured outcomes?
We don't
have to go in and say, you must only do these things, right? And every law must be very, very specific in that we're trying to make sure someone doesn't break the rules. Whenever you make laws like that, people will always break the rules. That's the first thing in agility is if you try and monitor someone, they will find a way around your monitoring.
I'm all about fewer laws, but I'm more about if there is a law, I know what it is, I can count on it and it's reliable. But give me an example of what you're saying, because I still don't think that the ATF making something illegal this October that was illegal for the last 13 years.
Legal for the last 13 years.
And that's not legislation. That's just the ATF saying, we've changed what the parameters of this are.
Because that's what the legislation gives them the right to do.
But it should.
The legislation we passed says we give you, the executive part of this organization, the right to change laws up to a point, right? We don't give them free reign, right? They can't go in there and all of a sudden say everyone has to wear don't tread on my rights shirts, right? They can't go in and just write whatever laws they want. They are very limited by the legislation passed to give to them. I wouldn't want legislatures in charge of determining the best way to keep us all safe all of the time when we have money involved, when we have investments.
So you're okay with the ATF being able to change laws? Like, would you be okay with the highway patrol? Oh, they did.
They changed the rules. They changed the rules, but they didn't change the law.
Can you be a felon under the rules?
Yes.
I believe you can only be a felon when you break a law. Now, would you be okay if the highway patrol sat out, say, on I-15, and you're driving to work and you're doing 75, you're doing 75, you're doing 75, and then you get pulled over one day and ticketed for 15 over because they changed the speed limit to 50?
I would be okay with UDOT changing the speed.
No.
Hold on. I know. I'm
not talking UDOT. I'm talking the enforcement arm. I'm not talking UDOT. I'm talking the enforcement arm. The ATF is an enforcement arm.
But so I actually really like this because we have rules that also protect citizens as part of that legislation. So even if we were to give the right for them to make that change, we also recognize we have to change the signs. We have to give proper notice. We usually will give a pretty good grace period. All of these things are already managed as part of the legislation. They're not passing new laws. We've said, hey, this group gets to define what is legal and not legal armament. And we passed that legislation. If you want to repeal that legislation, that's fine, but they're not passing new laws. They are changing the rules as given them the authority. I'm going to dig in a very limited space.
I'm going to dig in and see if there's legislation that allows them to do this, because I would bet there's not. I would bet that even the NFA doesn't give them this leverage and liberty.
Okay, I would love to see that. And I would love to change my mind and say, okay, this is not okay. But I'd also be okay to say, I'm willing to pass legislation that gives them the right to do so.
I don't think so. But I don't think any time that someone can turn out to be a felon, I would not give the enforcement arm the ability to discern what rules can make you a felon. I would not want to give the cops the discernment to say, let's say Utah, is there a minimum marijuana amount in Utah where you can, where you don't,
maximum,
or an amount where it crosses into felony land?
Yes.
Would you be okay if the enforcement arm, say the drug squad in Salt Lake County has the ability to adjust that weight?
So I want to address this directly, and I would love it if you gave me the chance to finish.
Yes.
If that were to happen and they had that authority would be done by legislation. We would pass a law that says this group gets to make that change. I would not fight for the ability for them to make that change on a whim and change it anytime they want. But I would allow them to make that change through a series of processes that allows our citizens to be notified, that allows a check by the legislature to make sure, hey, this doesn't actually make sense, right? You've way overcrossed your bounds, and be able to then protect the citizens from whatever thing that they were going to do. And then I would expect them to have a grace period, much like we did for bump stocks, right? We didn't just change them and then all of a sudden you were felon from 1 second to the other. We said, hey, this is what's going to happen. Here's the reasons why. This is the outcome we're looking to start trying to improve. So here's when that thing is going to happen. Could we have had a better buyback program that would have better compensated, not just for those materials, but for travel and, frankly, frustration? Sure. I would love that, but it's going to require that people pay taxes.
Yeah, I don't like that the populace gets, I'm not a fan of bump stocks, but I don't like that the general populace has to get chewed on their taxes to pay back a feel-good law written on the desk of the executive. That sounds, I mean, I remember watching the cartoon, you know, the three branches of government keep each other in check. Now, granted, I know Congress hasn't done their thing that they're supposed to do, but that doesn't mean that the president gets to step up and do things that he's not supposed to do.
And I'm Donald Trump signing that. And this is, you know, you've given me more context and more information. And for that, I thank you. So I agree with you. Donald Trump should not have been able to do that because he was never given the power to be able to do that, right? He absolutely has the power to change a whole bunch of federal things, much like Obama did for providing benefits to queer people during his, but only when they were employed by the government. Mm-hmm. Great. He wanted to make this limitation that any government employees can't have bump stocks. Cool. Okay. Real weird. About as effective as only blocking people from China that are Chinese. But, you know, in the end, he had the power to do so. He should not and did not have the power to do what he did. Mm-hmm. Did we have a Congress that tried to stop him?
No, it was right after that Las Vegas shooting, I believe, a couple months after. And it was the popular thing to do. But of course, has Congress tried enforcing on any president in the last, 75 years? Hey, we declare wars, you don't.
I am 100% in agreement with you. That is absolutely one of those things that should have a lengthy process in making sure we understand exactly how that impact is going to hit us. This is where I would love to see a huge shift in the way that we talk about war and having a standing army and militias. Yeah. I think there is a way better interpretation of the Second Amendment that would give us all much better access to be able to learn how to shoot and be able to own our own guns. That would ultimately require the realization that we've known for thousands of years. Every country that has a standing army uses it.
Yeah, standing army is the greatest threat to liberty, James Madison.
So I am 100% there, but that also comes with a significant shift in our military away from international management to protection. And then now we can say, hey, in that agile space, if I have a team that's having a hard time, it doesn't make sense to come in with another team and attack them to make them have a better time. Instead, what makes sense is coming in, understanding their system, how they got to that part, allow us to actually hold all parties accountable. And I don't mean punishment, I mean accountable. Just being able to say, hey, yes, I am so glad for a number of things that George Washington did for us. But I can also say that he owned slaves, and that is terrible. And we should have known better, but we didn't. And that's okay. We just didn't. That's who he is. He's a flawed individual, like all of us are. But if I can give you that kindness of that feedback and say, hey, actually that viewpoint is really damaging for a lot of people. That right now, if we see the fall of Obergefell, I cannot say it, and I should be able to as a queer person. But if we see the fall that says, hey, gay marriage is no longer allowed, my marriage is immediately invalidated here in the state of Utah. Immediately.
So do you think that, one, I don't think government should be involved in marriage or unions, not especially not involved in whether one is had. I guess what I'm saying is your marriage should be done between you, your partner, and either your church if you're religious, or I can perform marriages. I am an ordained minister of
me too.
the
Some
Church of the
California
Internet,
Light Church,
something like that. But or whatever. But I don't believe the government should ever have a say in whether you can get married. I think the government should just be, okay, you want to declare you're married. This is kind of where, because let's face it, marriage is a business partnership. This is where you file for your business partnership. This is the gross side of marriage.
And that ultimately is still something that matters. How the resources get divided between two people that entered a contract, that we have established a ton of evidence that is a valuable contract for our country, for our communities, right? And so enabling marriage in more places and enabling the ability for people to love whoever they want to love, I am all for. But I think we also have to recognize it should still be limited by the requirements of any other contract. You have to be old enough for consent, right? Like you've got to be able to do that. And then we have to be able to, as a state, recognize to make sure that someone who is abusive, no matter what gender, doesn't have the ability to leave and take everything.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when we live in a culture, and this isn't a negative thing, this is the actual family arrangement I have, where one person doesn't work. They don't have career history. And so if I wasn't responsible by the state to honor my contract with this person, I could leave and she would be in a really terrible spot. But I have responsibilities as indicated by our contract requirements, because that will affect the community in a significantly negative way if people are allowed to do that. So I think they have to be involved in marriage, but never defining who.
Do they have to be? I mean, I think that all those circumstances can be fluid. Again, I'm a big personal responsibility guy, and also a guy who got married at 18. My head was about, 6 miles up my fourth point of contact when I got married, got my butt handed to me financially. But then again, that's still personal responsibility that I had to take, where it's fluid. I think when you get governments involved in it, I think you would agree that not everybody's the same, nor is every circumstance the same. And when you write down blanket circumstances, they can tend to get abusive. And I would like to see more protections for single mothers. Not that I don't know. I don't know if I could ever say I think that a divorced husband should ever get alimony, but I'm just a chauvinist man. But maybe there should be something like that in there. But I don't know. I don't know if I've made this clear yet. I'm not a fan of government. I'm not a fan. Here's another funny question. The state of Utah, do you own your own business?
I do.
How fun was it to set up your whole tax thing for your business? Was it clear?
Yeah.
Really?
The website's actually really super easy to use, except for the ID login thing that they introduced
and
4 or 5 years ago. But the actual registration was super easy.
Oh, it's quick. I'll give you that. But they asked some. What did it ask? Are you are you a resident of the state? Or they ask questions that try to trip. And I'm just like, why do you ask dumb questions like this? And it's just, I don't know. It's just none of
money.
it's,
They ask dumb questions like that because our software engineering teams that are state funded don't have the number of people to be effective.
huh. So we need to get
Because
molested more so that we can pay better taxes to get molested more.
or to have the ability to pay and get quality services out of the government that we want to get quality services out of. Everything that the government does do for us that we like our socialized firefighting or our socialized cops.
I live out in Tooele. Our firefighting is volunteer.
But it's not paid.
Yeah, it's volunteer.
No, what I mean is you don't have to pay for it.
I know, but it's not socialized.
I don't see how those two things need to be different. It's socialized in that you do not have to pay for it, and there's never a case where someone gets
socialized would mean that everyone universally pays for it, that it's become social. Privatized would mean that it's like what was it, Pompey's fire brigades. But this is a volunteer. But then again, the equipment and the building is definitely socialized.
Exactly. And if they are harmed, who pays the medical bill?
I'm sure.
Is it them?
I would hope we do. Yeah.
I would hope that we do too. It is a socialized service that we've accepted in that city that we don't pay people for it. And that to me is a problem, that they should absolutely be being paid for it, that it should be something that is highly sought after.
Let me ask you a question.
So that we can, again, allow them to do their best work.
Okay. So within the city limits of Tooele, I think in the last 4 years, we've had 4 residential fires. How much would that cost to have a full-time fire department and our fire department is an excellent fire department, but how much would that legitimately cost to have a full-time fire department? Is it something that you can justify spending, that you can justify putting maybe the brand new family a little further down that rung of success? Maybe they've got to cut some calories out of their baby's diet to afford to live in your city. Do you see what I'm saying? Tooele is not notoriously
I don't, because
rich.
I think you're making a logical jump there that changes in, paying
Explain to me that logical jump.
Let's say we have 15 people, and let's say we pay them all $100,000 a year.
Okay.
You now have $150,000 the city has to come up with.
Okay.
Cool. I don't see why that has anything to do with someone that can't afford food. Tooele, how many millionaires live in Tooele?
If there's one, I'll be surprised.
I'm pretty sure we have at least one.
I think Tooele's got a population of 15,000. No, maybe that's Grantsville. Tooele probably closer to 20.
Well, and let's be real. Like you said earlier, all of our states are in this together. All of our cities are in this together.
Okay.
Other cities would be affected if Tooele burned down.
Sure.
And we had to, pull everyone over. And so I honor the fact that we have people that are willing to give their own time to be able to do this job without compensation. I think that is incredible. I think we're missing opportunities for people that really want to do that work that can't now. And we're now probably pushing people to do that work that shouldn't, or don't want to, but feel like they have to because no one else is, right? We now put that in a situation where we rely on labor for the city. The state relies and asks that we have labor for the city that they do not pay for. And I believe we should always pay for that. And if that city says, oh, that would be a lot for us, we can recognize as other cities or as counties that it's super valuable for you to not have your city burned down. And instead of not thinking, oh, I'd rather not pay a little bit more in my property taxes. Oh, we're over.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm I can see a justification in some circumstance. Obviously, I mean, in Salt Lake, where they've got a higher density, more response time, more use for a full-time paid fire department. I do believe it would be good if we figured out a way to compensate them for time that they put in. You know, however we figured out to compensate them.
They can take their gear home. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Actually, that would, that
really
might
cool
even
part.
be an ideal situation, is they take that gear home, or the city builds them a little fancy shed next to their driveway where their gear is stored, where they have like a little jump room. They can hop in and throw their gear on, whatever. But I don't, and I don't know how many fires there has been in Tooele within the city limits that they've responded to. I don't know how that circumstance works. And then you've got North Tooele, which has an even smaller population, but they're a really good fire department up there, probably easily one of the best in the state. But they do a lot of response times on I-80. Now, some of those are paramedic status and on ambulance status, and they sit there full time for their response, and they get paid for that.
Yeah, I think we should get paid for our labor. I especially think we should get paid for labor for the government.
So you think there should be no room for voluntary services for the government?
Oh, I believe absolutely you can have add volunteers, right? Or even in your city, being able to really identify, hey, maybe it makes more sense to have 2 full-time and the rest are volunteers. But either way, having the focus there to allow people to get paid for their labor. And then if we want to augment it with volunteerism, that's great.
I do believe our chief is a full-time position out here. But I would see in a circumstance with as small as our population is to not allow voluntary firefighters.
Well, and like I said, like, we can recognize there's lots of ways to tackle this problem. And like you and me, neither of us are experts in, fire organization for cities, but neither are any of our legislatures, which is leaning back to this is why we say, hey, city and fire department, determine the best way to construct yourself. Tooele has determined that is a volunteer fire, department. Awesome, because they had the ability to make that choice. We didn't say, hey, that's got to go all the way up to the legislature. We got to make sure we spend time to make sure we know how much we want to pay everybody. We recognize it makes sense for those people that are doing the execution of that job to make the best decisions for that job.
Well, I think it falls within community rights where it doesn't reach a legislature level because it falls in that gray area between the 9th and 10th Amendments. It's a community-based thing. I would just, it's like
everything's community-based in the end.
Yeah, well, it is.
I think that's what we're missing, is that everything is ultimately a home problem.
It is.
LGBT.
It is until you live out in Tooele. I don't know. Have you been out in Tooele very often?
It's been a long time. It's been at least a decade since I've gone out there.
Okay. Now the UTA is a popular system in Salt Lake, Provo, and Ogden, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not popular out here. And that is because, well, this is my argument about Democrats and Republicans. Democrats love government because they generally live in cities and have more contact with government that's positive, affirming, or helpful. And Republicans live out in mostly rural areas when most of the time when the government's coming around, your wallet's going to get lighter. There's going to be, some encroachments on your way of life. And that's just the two basic facts. Not saying one's right and one's wrong.
I don't agree with those basic facts.
I think the bus comes through here twice a day. I have a cousin who tried riding the bus to work in Salt Lake, and it chalked like 3 hours on her ride to work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. The point is that not a lot of encounters with the government when there's a lot of benefit.
So there's this really amazing article, and I'll have to go and find it again, that talks about, again, that services are just like everything else. We get what we pay for.
Sure.
We are all super against paying taxes to get better services, and then we complain about the poor services that we get.
I'm not complaining about it. I think you missed my point. My point is that if I'll explain my point again. Sorry. My point is, and nothing to be sorry about, because again, knuckle dragging ape, probably hard to understand most of the time. My point is that out in the rural areas, we don't have positive benefit from government very often. We don't have that interaction. Go ahead. We don't have that interaction of the mass transit system very often. Our mass transit system out this way, whether it's because we haven't paid for a better one or not, is unavailable. We have people that work further out west into the desert who it is exactly unavailable for them. There is no one who's going to get on a UTA bus into Willa and find themselves in Aragonite. Not one person. Yet we have a few people that work out there. Where in Salt Lake, the mass transit is way more usable, and this was the exact opposite about 120 years ago between Democrats and Republicans.
Well, lots of things were different. But
no, it was who felt that they had more, contact with the government that was positive than negative. And that was, it was just the way it was, and it's not saying anything bad, but what that is going to do is that's going to reflect on people who live in cities will tend to reflect on these things different than people who live in the country. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do see what you're saying. I don't disagree with you, right? People have ultimately different experiences that shape the way they're going to view the world, and then change the way they even react to anything that happens after that. So it absolutely makes sense that they are going to see the government differently. Does that mean that the government's bad?
Not 90% of the time.
Right?
98%.
They also have roads that go out to those areas, and not enough. But again, are we talking about investing more in infrastructure? Are we talking about trying to stop the investment of infrastructure?
Oh, it gets talked about all the time. It gets talked about all the time.
But we don't do it because we can't raise taxes.
Believe me. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not one of those guys who argues without the government there would be no roads. I am absolutely not one of those.
I don't believe there would be no roads, for sure.
I believe there would be better roads because those roads would have to compete. Just like when Ma Bell closed, right? Remember Ma Bell? You're a little bit younger than I am, but You
Yeah,
probably
that
remember.
happened when I was like 10.
Okay,
maybe.
I was probably, I don't know, 14 or something, 12, whatever. Ma Bell closed because it was a government force monopoly, which all monopolies have to exist with government force. They just can't exist without it. Ma Bell closed, and now we have these amazing things in our hands. Less than 20 years later, we have this device in our hands. We have the space shuttle in our hands. We have the world in our hands because the government stopped forcing a monopoly.
I think that's a really big leap, considering that the internet was a government funded effort, as is a lot of subsidization for.
Sure, the small space communication was a government funded effort. All the advances on the internet happened in the free market. All of them. If we left it up to the government,
it's not.
If we left it up to the government, we'd all be talking on Tor right now, because that is the government internet.
Here's where I think I have the big difference. I don't believe that the person that pays you changes who you are.
Sure.
I don't believe that government employees go in to do government work poorly.
Sure.
And I believe that this idea that government workers are lazy and bad and that they can't do good work is kind of inappropriate, because what we're saying is,
did I say any of those things?
As soon as you get paid by this person, you can no longer do good work. And what we recognize is that the investments that a lot of those private companies were able to use came from the government. Now, if our focus in the government was instead, hey, all science and investment and innovation belongs to the people. I'm not arguing for this, but I want to make the point. If that's what they said, and you had a group that was tasked with making innovations, they would innovate. When you give governments the ability to innovate, when you give the teams the ability to innovate, they do. This is why when you walk into an elementary school here, most people are surprised that it's the level of engagement that actually exists in our elementary schools, because we all just keep hearing that we're just teaching to the tests and all of these things that are now 10 years old. The truth is, we gave these teams the ability to make the best choices as they saw as experts in the field to create outcomes. And we've seen significant improvements in the way that we have success for a broader range of people. I don't believe in the idea that because it's government, it will be bad. I believe the government has the highest level of accountability to us when we have a functioning democracy. And we have to start creating a functioning democracy, because we do not have one right now.
But we're not a democracy. Democracy is mob rule. We're
Democracy is
republic is individual rights.
And we can have a democratic republic. The pedantry around whether we're a republic or a democracy, I think, is kind of a red herring. Because in the end, we say we have a representational republic, and we specifically indicate that the states as a group get to vote on that. And each of those states said, yeah, okay, cool, we'll do a democracy, right? This is how we're going to do it. Everything that we do here is democracy. We vote for representatives because we recognize.
I got to correct you on a couple things. One, states did not vote on that, right? The Constitution was signed in secret, behind closed doors, sworn to secrecy. That is an exact fact. Two, there was a few states that tried to leave it once. Kind of didn't go so well, right? So no, but we are not a democracy. A democracy, we are a republic where we democratically elect people to write laws for us, to vote in our stead, right? Now, my argument with why I don't like democracies is because I don't think that if there's three of us standing around, two should be able to vote to take something away from me. And that's what democracy is. That's why democracies have notoriously failed. Right? Kind of why republics were born out of democracies. Democracies are much older than republics. Much older than republics.
Absolutely. I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think we also sometimes, when we talk about the failures of other systems, we don't recognize the failures of our own.
I recognize the failures of my system.
Our republic just voted because there were more of those republic representatives that are of a particular gender to pass and take away something from someone else. We do that.
What did they vote to pass and take away?
They voted to take away their privacy.
Who voted to take away their privacy?
Let's see. Was it 2 years ago that we passed the trigger abortion law?
Okay. Now, what is the precipitating facts on that?
I think there's a lot of precipitating facts. Why? You want to go back to when
let's go through
progressives were gathering all the Christians, and so we had a particular pastor that decided if he created this controversy, then the conservatives could bring the religious people back over to their party.
We don't need to talk about Reagan bolstering the party in the 80s. I'm saying let's go back to the 70s. Roe versus Wade was the judicial branch making legislation.
Okay.
That's what that was.
How can you...
Do I agree? I'm not arguing on either side of this, but I am going to look at the clear fact that...
And I don't think that's a clear fact. I think it's an interpretation of that experience.
Okay.
Because I would... How would the state be able to prosecute you for getting an abortion? What information does the state need?
They usually prosecute doctors that provide abortions. I think in every state that's initiated a trigger law, not one of them comes after the mother. Not one. Every one of them goes after the doctors, and I think only one of them goes after the doctor criminally. All the rest of them go after the doctor vocationally, if I remember. I'm not supporting this or not supporting it. I'm just supporting, if I'm going to have to live under the boot of a government, I want my government to be clear. I want it to be defined. I want it to be honest and forthright. Sometimes that means some of the things it does, I may not agree with, but I can agree with it being honest, forthright, and clear. Like, my Congress should be the only part of my government that can declare war and send my fellow soldiers over to another country to bleed.
I'm with you. I completely agree with you on that one.
Now, when Roe versus Wade was signed, it was a delineation from that edict. And it was spoken about then that it was. And it's been spoken about forever that it was. We live in a pendulum swing of a government. Yes, right now, the conservatives are starting to swing back because the progressives have had their swing. And they're swinging back. And it's going to get chaotic and ugly for a moment. Right now, I argue, is the time when legislators need to, if you have enough people in the state to argue for changing that, then gather the coalition and change that legislatively, the correct way. There is also the correct way is to write and adjust laws. Because right now the other side have written and adjust the law. Whether you or I agree with it, I'm just stating a fact. They have written a law.
I don't think we've been arguing about whether this is a fact like this entire time. And I don't think it's fair to keep saying it's a fact when we have not come around to the executive branch is given authority based off of the legislation passed to define those rules. If we don't want them to be able to define those rules, we need to change that legislation, but they're not writing new legislation. And the Trump thing, that's not in the legislation that he says he can do that. We agree because
What do you
that's
mean?
not something he's allowed to do.
Our legislation didn't write the trigger law?
Our legislation wrote the trigger law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then what I'm saying, I'm arguing on where you're trying to head to is you gather a coalition there and fix that. Right?
And now, that's why I'm running on kindness.
Now we're living in an odd time. This is an odd time that hasn't really been spoken about since, oh shit, I would say the last time would have been 1845. I mean, it's been spoken about by weirdos like myself. But we live in a time of states' rights where we're going to become that melting pot of ideas where, let's face it, if Utah continues down the path it's heading on, I might start looking around and find my cozier place in the world, which is fine, and let Utahns have their cozy place, because a part of that, the argument against abortion is simply not that they want to control a woman's body.
Oh, I agree.
Okay. So then do you understand why they're vociferously against it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I absolutely understand.
Okay, good. Good.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is I would like to see, like, my ideal status would be, all right, we're going to make it legal, but not a dime is going to come from the public purse for it.
That's what we already had.
Money went to Planned Parenthood from the public purse, but
right. They had to make sure that all of their abortions were funded by other money.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure that none of that happened. I'm sure they didn't bolster any of their pocketbooks or make their reach any bigger. Seriously, I would make it so that
you don't think that Utah legislature wouldn't investigate that? Do you think the Utah
that was
done? Like, cool, Planned Parenthood, you can do whatever you want.
That was done on a national level mostly. I would make it so that it was a totally like that service was a separate service. And I would make it so that you have a clear delineation. Now, if other states want to donate to it, fine. But I would make it so that none of the public funds, which means no Utah funds, no Tooele County funds, and no federal funds, can find its way into, and that way you can argue we are doing everything we can to keep your moral conscience clear.
So I want to ask you your own question.
Okay.
Do you understand why pro-choice people have the viewpoint they have?
Completely.
Okay. So we can recognize that in situations where we've tried to create differing levels based off of one group's morality, we have found that highly affects that separated service's ability to function. We know this. We know that as soon as we say, oh, you can't do this, and we restrict it, we now put so much regulation around it that it's impossible for us, for people to be able to perform what is ultimately very valuable services for people that can have babies now, or that can get pregnant.
Let me ask
because
you,
some people can't have babies, but they can still get pregnant.
Let me ask you a question. Let's give leverage to both sides right now. Let's say the progressive side, their worst nightmare of that is completely true. And the conservative side, their worst nightmare of that is completely true. Which situation?
I want to propose something different.
Which situation carries the largest moral gravity?
I actually want to propose a different direction. And that is, we actually have the same fear. We have the same deepest, darkest fear. So here's the way I want to kind of structure where my viewpoint is.
What is the same deepest,
I've been led
darkest fear?
on a couple of direct questions that weren't really, but for me, what I look at, let's say I give the entire argument to pro-life, to pro-birth, and that is life begins at conception, right at conception. Cool. Let's start there. Now, if that is the case, would you want any government, regardless of its location, to be able to determine one person's value over another and then force you to undergo medical procedures to keep that person alive, regardless of whatever choices you've made?
So you're asking me, a hardcore libertarian, would I expect someone to live with the consequences of their actions versus
I didn't ask
murdering?
that question, Jared.
No, this is it. I would I would expect someone to live with the consequences of their actions over murder any day of the week.
Okay. So here's the deal.
1,000 days a
What
week.
are the consequences we're allowed to give someone for murder?
What do you mean? What are the consequences we're allowed to, like if someone commits murder, what are we allowed to punish them with? I believe, hey, I'm just telling you, I'm not going to take a stance on this side. Were it me, let's say someone murdered you. What should I do with them? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking, what are we allowed to do should someone murder me? Right now, what are we allowed to do? We have to first find evidence. We have to
go through the process,
prove
due process,
that something has happened.
Okay.
Right. And then until we actually prove that has happened, we can put them in jail. Right. Or after we've done that, we can then put them in jail. Right.
Yeah. Commonly for murder, we put them in jail during the investigation, halfway through, part of the way through.
Sure.
Once we feel we have a preponderance of evidence to show a judge that they can then
have a warrant,
that they can then go through the due process states to strip you of your rights. But no, I'm just saying.
Could I instead say, hey, we have the medical capacity to revive your murder victim with your body?
Okay.
And it will mess you up. There's no way it's not going to. It will mess you up. Your body will never, ever be the same. It's entirely possible you will die. And you will be heavily limited in your ability to contribute to society while this is occurring.
So
would you think that would be something that we would want the state to be able to do?
A great chance they will die. So, okay, let me ask you this. We got to remember, under 99 point more than 5%, their own decisions and actions brought them to this circumstance. And I know this pisses a lot of people off.
You're talking about consequences again, as if a life is a consequence. And I'm already addressing that. You've taken a life.
Okay.
Is the state allowed to force your body to bring that person back to life?
Should a state be allowed to kill someone without due process?
Should the state be allowed to use your body to force someone else to be alive without your consent?
Should you be allowed to kill someone for your convenience?
I think that is a really harsh question, but I'd love for you to answer.
Isn't the other way?
As a libertarian.
Okay.
As a libertarian.
Okay. If your situation, hold on. hold on.
I'm going to answer your question. Yes,
Yes.
I agree with you. Yes, the state should be allowed to kill someone for convenience.
Okay.
And we already say that we can't. And do you know how we do that? You're not allowed to have my organs unless I tell you you can have them.
Is that killing someone?
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Not at all. Someone dying.
Wait.
Someone dying versus
exactly
you preventing that death is not the same thing.
We could save this person, and the state has the right
causation.
to use someone else's body.
Causation has no reflection in your reality.
State has the right to define whether one life is more important than another, and then force that life to sustain the other. If you stab someone and they didn't die, I would not want the government to be able to then force you to constantly maintain a physical connection to maintain that person's life. Would you want the state to be able to do that?
All right, let's pose this another way then. Because yes,
I don't understand why.
I think restitution for crimes is extremely honest way to manage that. I believe restitution for crimes is one of the missing pieces of our judicial system. And I believe restorative justice doesn't have punishment in it. Let's say I drunk drove, hit someone in a car, paralyzed them. The state comes after me. They hit me with all their fines, whatever. But the person I paralyzed maybe doesn't have the means to get a lawyer, or an ambulance chaser doesn't notice it at the time. But if the state stepped in and said, guess what? You now pay a form of welfare to help maintain this person's life. You pay for that nurse that changes their diaper, whatever. I'm all about that. Now,
we already have that, but you can't force that person to then, you can't be forced to then go around and physically carry that person everywhere you go. That would be cruel and unusual punishment.
God, I think I could go for that too. You become the chauffeur for, however long.
So how often do you trust that we are 100% right when we determine who is responsible for a crime?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a very
because
good
what
question.
I could see here is a very rich person that's well connected.
Sure.
Sure.
They have it
stabbing themselves and then saying this poor person that has no way to be able to defend themselves based off of the lawyers that I have now gets to come and show
So you think a rich person,
and I don't have to pay them.
You think a rich person would subject themselves to that, to have someone who's poor to become kind of their indentured servant?
I
that would
think
be interesting. I think we could look at
history as a student of history. Yes,
actually,
the moral loss that we accepted within our souls for industrialized slavery is not any different. If we're talking about
I think
morality,
we see situations like this happen in now modernizing countries right now, where people throw themselves in front of cars. I think it's faulty to look at it as a rich person would do this, so a poor person would have to work for them or something. I think that's a faulty way to look at it, or a faulty way to lay it out.
do you think
honestly,
we've not used poor people for fall people in other cases?
Maybe, I don't know. Not in a circumstance
maybe
like
they don't stab themselves, but maybe they get stabbed in a club where all the other rich douches hang out.
Maybe not.
And then they say, well, I'd rather charge this person because I don't want this guy to carry me around because my investment in his company would be completely killed.
You'd have to
hit it on this person.
You'd have to show me an example of that. But we do have, I mean, in developing countries, lots of people throw themselves in front of cars for insurance adjustments, and our own soldiers had a lot of instances in the last 20 years where families would throw what they considered an expendable child under military vehicles for profit. That did happen. That actually happened to a buddy of mine, man. It messed him up hard. But anyways,
that sounds terrible.
It does. It does. Imagine being the guy who gets to carry that with you. But I'm not arguing for pro-life.
Seem to be.
I'm
I'm gonna be honest. I feel like there's a lot of
But there's
libertarian, but there's
a
no
point
defense
to
on
it.
the other side. There's never been a defense on the other side.
Oh, I see an argument for the other side, but I don't need to bring that argument. You brought that. You brought no
That's a fair
deference.
point.
You brought no deference for the pro-life side, where they believe that is murdering the most innocent of being for a mistake someone made.
And let's be clear. Well, are you married, Jared?
No. Tried
You
it
like to be
twice.
married?
I'm not very good at it.
Are you in a committed relationship? Would you like
No.
to be in a long-term relationship?
God, no.
Do you feel like it's good for people to get married?
Sure.
Okay. Do you feel like once people get married, they should be able to have sex?
You bet.
Did you know that 60% of people that choose to have an abortion already have children?
Sure. I know
And that
most of them
and that a
are
lot
for
of them
financial reasons. I know. I've looked at the evidence.
$1,500 extra dollars
I look at the
would
evidence.
allow them to keep that baby. $1,500 extra dollars.
And
They would rather have that child. Most of them want these children,
maybe, did
but
you
they
know
that they can't,
the
in
same
our society, be able to afford them
the
because
same
of the way
number
our society is structured.
the same number
It's not a mistake. It's a choice. It's
This-
a decision someone has to make. Do I get to add to my lovely family? Or will that hurt? Let's actually put it this way. Who was the representative recently that said, I would do anything to protect the rights of my grandchildren, including the right to be able to have a gun, all the way up to shooting them for it and killing them for it so that they could keep their freedoms?
Huh? A
Yep.
representative said he would shoot his grandchild to give his grandchild
No. She would shoot her grandchildren in order to protect them from the loss of freedom in some way. The way she said it made it sound like she would shoot them in order to protect them from not being able to buy guns.
Do you think
But
she
I know
made a
that's not what
mistake
she
in
meant.
that talk or in the way she spoke? Or do you think
what
she
was
was
trying
that
to say is something we've
vociferous?
all said as parents or as possible parents. If my kid was about to be taken into sex slavery at the age of 4 or 5, and I had the opportunity to stop that, and the only way to stop that was to kill them, would I? Would you?
Ooh, that's it. Boy. I mean, my kid's 27 and outweighs me by at least 60 pounds. If someone's kidnapping
he probably
him
didn't
for,
do that at 4.
if someone's kidnapping him for sex slavery, they're in for a wild ride. He's a big dude.
I don't imagine he was that size at 4.
No, he was not.
And so,
But
the point is,
would
we
I kill
all
them?
recognize we would be willing to go to that incredible, terrible extreme in order to protect not just the suffering of that person, but also the suffering of that family,
Isn't it
the
like
suffering of the other children, the suffering of the community. All of those things can be affected. And we've seen it throughout all of human history, where families would get too large and they would have to find ways
let me ask you
to let
another
go
question.
of one of their kids?
I want you to put yourselves in a shoe. And yes, good hell, they wrote fairy tales around why they killed their kids to justify it. It's god awful. But anyways, let me
But they had to. They couldn't.
sure,
No,
they
otherwise the
couldn't
whole
live with
family
themselves
starts to
with
death,
what
which is
they
better.
did. Let me ask you a question though. I'm not religious either. I am an atheist. But I do see the religious side of this.
Pascal's wager. Is that
That murder
is it?
that murder, especially unprovoked murder, is a heavy sin. Some of them believe that is a heavy sin that as a society they could bear that burden for. Now, we could go into some of the nuances that their side also supported going into Iraq and killing all those people. But obviously in the beginning, that wasn't the notion. We were there to liberate them. Same with Vietnam, Libya, Iran, whatever. We don't have all night to list off countries we violated, but
Standing armies.
But you've got to look at, they believe it's a societal sin. Now, granted, there are 13 states that have trigger laws that become essentially zero abortion. I mean, you can still, they've got zero past plan B, I guess is what it would be.
Mhm.
But then again, there's like 7 states that their abortion rights went to the other side of the road. Like, you're dilated to a 10, you're crowning. Okay, now do the thing. So it's insanity on both sides, and Republicans and Democrats are firing shots at each other.
Inaccurate representation of what happens in late-term abortions. What happens in late-term abortions are generally parents that have already bought their furniture, parents that have looked and listen. Please,
whatever it is, I'm not here to argue against it. What's happening is that child is about to have the worst pain with no availability for any sort of any experience that is anything besides pain. And we're saying, no. Even if the doctor recognizes they're not going to live past 24 hours, they must experience that pain for those 24 hours. And we recognize we would not do this for a lot of other situations, lots of other situations. We also recognize sometimes it's simply for the health of the mother, right? We have preeclampsia. The quickest way to save you from preeclampsia is simply getting the baby out. It is the most effective way. Isn't health of the mother still allowed in Utah? I read the law. Yes. It's completely allowed.
But absolutely. No, it absolutely is.
Oh, okay.
But now you're also talking about how does someone make that decision in a way that allows them to feel safe in making that decision.
Isn't that a decision that's made by the doctor? And it's written right there in the law. I mean, this is one, and I'm not arguing for that law.
We're not going to challenge that doctor. We're not going to continually, every time they perform an abortion, charge them with something. So it's absolutely impossible to financially be able to perform what is ultimately the ability for me.
That's a good question. Do you think something like that would be done on a city, a county, or a state level?
I don't believe any government body should be able to choose and decide if my body has to support another one for any choice that I've made.
I've already told you what my argument is. My argument is, I like Clinton's words, how he described it, and keep the government completely out. And then they have no leg to stand on. And it was a dead issue up until what, 2009? 2011. It was a dead issue. It had gone out of the public conscience. Mm-hmm. It was gone. It was there when I was a child. I remember it as a child through the 90s, but then it was gone. It was gone for 15 years, 20 years. No, it couldn't have been 20, 15 years. It was gone. I went through all my early adulthood. It still happened. I had friends who were party to it. Hell, I may have been a party to it not knowingly, but it still happened. And it wasn't until they tried forcing nuns to go against their religious conscience. And I'm not a religious person. I used to be much more militaristic about this not religious part. But I'm not now because,
When, at what point do you feel like we should take someone's belief system into account when creating laws? And at what point do you ignore other people's belief systems?
Just theological belief system or societal belief system? Because you ready? I'm an anarchist.
Religious belief system.
You're ready to hear about it. One, let's face it, money stripped away to go to Washington, D.C. is never going to provide much good for the state of Utah. Money stripped away to go to Salt Lake City is probably not going to provide much good for Tooele County. Although I imagine those are in your belief system.
So I think there's a difference between, hey, I look at the evidence over here, and based off of my values and my experiences and that evidence, this is what I feel like is the right thing to do. I feel like the federal government was in a very amazing position to help a ton of Utahns, and Utah blocked it. And then we tried to pass the ballot initiative to then allow that to happen, and our legislature blocked it again.
To help us how?
Now, expanding Medicare.
Okay.
So, and what's amazing about that is that's not generally our money, because we spend less going to the federal government than comes back to us.
Was there
this would have increased that number where we would have spent less?
Have you read the bill? I'm not familiar with this. Have you read the bill? Was there any strings attached? Because I remember Wyoming. Have you driven through Wyoming?
Don't you want the ability to create rules on who and when this money can be spent?
I wouldn't
want to be able to just give the money and then say, oh, you can give it to this connected person, wouldn't we?
The only thing I want to send to the federal government is one of those brown envelopes, you know, with the powdered, the puffy side inside of it with some runny dog shit. That's all I want to send to the feds. But I am a crazy person. I recognize this.
Yeah.
But was there string? Because do you remember, have you driven through Wyoming? And
I want to pull back to the belief system, because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
There is definitely a way to interpret data and outcomes in different ways.
Not arguing.
And then push towards a direction.
I'm not arguing.
Those things.
There is some
evidence. Those are different than a religious belief system that has no responsibility to evidence, has no responsibility to anyone, and then honoring that as something that should be allowed to pass laws without any way of saying, hey, how can we determine if this is not right? Because we have Jewish people, they say, nope, life begins at birth. We have the Satanic Temple, they say, your body is sacrosanct. The government should never be able to touch your body. So all of those belief systems exist, and they're all recognized as valid religions within the United States. Now their religious rights are being taken away because we are forced to only listen to one.
They're being taken away in the state of Utah.
Yes.
They're given more than what
our Utah Republican legislatures.
Colorado went more expansive on their rights. And I believe Nevada did as well.
Right.
And Arizona.
Cool.
And New Mexico. So there's an argument on both sides, but because you sit in the paradigm where...
What's the argument on the other side? I don't understand.
No, there's an argument that both sides got to run. Because if I had to, I would prefer to live in a melting pot of ideas versus one size fits all. I would rather watch a state go crazy and fail than be forced to live as another state, and possibly both of them go crazy and fail. Because let's face it, our nation right now is kind of on that path to failure. And might that have been different had we stuck to the Federalist program?
You know, that's interesting because...
and that's not to say Utah won't change its mind and come back to a center, you know, in another 4 years or 8 years or 16 years. It might not. Not
if we don't hold our legislators accountable. But and we won't, because we treat
what if holding the legislators
parties as religious beliefs?
And
that's the problem, is you establish that just now.
Hold on. Let me ask you a question.
Belief is a religious belief. I get to believe whatever I want.
I believe it is.
Have a side.
I agree.
And my side has to be validated. It has to be validated.
But what if holding the legislators accountable over the next 16 years reinforces this rule that just come out? Because religious, specifically Christian, specifically one sect of Christianity, holds the majority in the state. It might happen.
In the legislature.
Might be in the whole state. We don't know. I'm not arguing for it or against it,
We
because
do,
whichever way they go, they go. I have no dog in that fight.
and but I think we've got to recognize what I'm trying to point out is we do. As soon as we create a precedent that someone gets to determine if one body is more valuable than another,
you bet,
and
this
you
could
are
go
forced
awry.
to, through whatever action it is, including things we want to do. We know sex is good. Sex is great. It makes us happier. It makes us more connected. It allows us to solve problems better. It helps us be more effective in sports.
I've got 2 divorces under the belt. I don't know if it allowed me to solve any problem. But here's another question.
Maybe that had to do with the sex.
It could be. It could be. I might be god awful at it. But what if, on the other side, we take all moral we continue down that path of stripping personal moral responsibility from our actions? What does society look like?
So, and here's where I think that is an inaccurate representation of what we're talking about here. Because if we were talking about moral responsibility, and we believe that life begins at conception, and we look at the data, we'll know 1/4 of pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion, as in a miscarriage.
All right.
If we felt that the most important thing was to protect those lives, the responsibility for protecting those lives would fall to men.
What's the average date that the average window that those spontaneous abortions happen?
The first 3 months, but during those first 3 months, guess what can't happen for that woman? She can't get pregnant again. I mean,
no clue.
Rare cases she can. But the guy that got her pregnant, he can do it 600 times in those 3 months.
I know, it's evil the way nature made us, isn't it? Of course, men.
And that's the problem.
Men also sign up for the draft. Men traditionally have only repopulated the earth at 3% compared to women's like 98%. There's a different nature pressures between men and women.
But we don't get to choose what those are based off of the religious values of one group of people.
Sure.
Because
what if we made it
takes away the scientific evidence that there's better ways.
Here we go. I got a thought. What if we
want to reduce abortions, free contraception? And if we say it's a life and that life is so valuable, why would we not want to pay taxes to reduce the number of people based off of their definition that die? Why would we allow
I love the idea
an IVF?
I love the idea that we pay taxes to the colander that is the government, where they peel off what do you reckon? At least 60% just goes to them, and then maybe a drip falls out to who needs it. Oh, you could add them all up, all of them. The 5. But here's a question: what if
I see one of our biggest expenses is one of our moral responsibilities being affected through our government, and that is taking care of our elderly. And as taking care of our elderly, the Medicare system, while so incredibly expensive, gets better value out of it. Despite attempts by Republicans to starve the beast of it, they still get better outcomes, better health outcomes, better cost outcomes.
When was the last time?
The most vulnerable and costly of our citizens. They have to take care of the elderly or the people that are really, really sick. It is only expensive, but yet it is more effective.
Here's a big question. When was the last time the government got involved in our healthcare system and it turned out that it either A, didn't get more expensive on the whole, even on the private side, or B, you got better service from it? Remember, you're talking to a veteran who avoids the VA like a plague for a reason.
Great. Probably when they decided to hand it over to private industry.
What do you mean?
Because we look at every other.
When did they decide to hand it over to private industry?
Reagan made the decision that healthcare was going to push to these
So
insurance agencies
our
in
healthcare,
order to
and I think you're thinking of Nixon
drive
when
more profit.
I think
Oh, you're right. You're right. I am thinking of Nixon.
And it was, our healthcare system was never public. Never. The, what do they call them? HMO system was the first initial gasp of government getting involved in healthcare. You have that exactly backwards.
Cool. Thank you for helping me understand that. How did you gain access to healthcare before that HMO happened?
Oh, well, we can go back to prior to FDR. It was usually done through your Rotary clubs. That was the big access point. The Rotary clubs was commonly, they would provide healthcare for the whole community. They would purchase doctors, and then they would also have slots where they could add the old lady down the street. You know, when you pull into a town, they've got Rotary Club, Lions Club, Elks Lodge, things like that. That was how it was done prior to FDR. FDR, when he put the freeze on pay during, just prior to World War II, during the Great Depression, businesses started offering health insurance to draw people to come work for them. And so that's why the Rotary clubs died. It's a real interesting study. You should probably, honestly, you should look into it.
No, that actually does sound really, really cool. I would love
it's interesting how much
Rotary.
They would pay like $32 a year for health insurance. Granted, that's in those money, so it'd probably be, you know, like $200 a year in health insurance, and it covered your whole family and your neighbor Ruth.
Again? Before FDR?
Yes, before FDR. Before businesses started offering it so that they could scalp prospective hires.
Oh, and then put us in a position where it's dangerous, is literally dangerous to our health.
Yeah, it kind of got more expensive once health insurance became the driving model of our medical system and not helping the community. Funny that, right? Driven. Funny that. And prior to that, you would have a local doctor, you know, but you know, FDR, he's a hero. It's not like he didn't steal all their gold and make us poor.
I thought we were a rich, powerful nation.
Imagine how much more rich and powerful we'd be.
I don't think so. That's the thing, is there's a lot of stuff here, and a lot of times we just state these things as a thought-stopping cliche without diving into what do we actually mean by that, right? How would we do a Rotary Club right now?
Well, they were born out of probably necessity. The Rotary Club, I think, centered around the automobile. Prior to that, you had like the Lions Club, I think is older than the Rotary clubs, though they all became known as Rotary clubs because as the automobile gained popularity, the Rotary Club became more popular because not only did it just offer, this was mostly the urban folk, the country folk. We know there's a lot of insurance company named Farm, right? Did I lose you? I might have lost you. Uh-oh. But anyways, it's been a great chat. I like this D guy, everyone. He's not here to even hear me sing his praises right now. He's just not here. But I do like him. He's a pretty good dude. Let's see if I can send him a message real quick. Oh, we had some comments, but we just got into the knee deep into the chat to where I missed out on all the comments. Oh. I should see if this one will come on again just for a hearty chat. You know, no objective. He did say earlier we're going to try to make this quick because his phone was about to die or something, but it might have died. But anyways, hearty chat. I'd like to have a good political theory and history talk with him. I like him. Everyone that's D. He's running for seat 44. I didn't even get to ask him exactly what his geographical location of that seat is. We're gonna have him back on, make up for this. Thanks for joining us. Sorry Dave wasn't here. Sorry I went long-winded. Sorry I went long. Sorry I didn't get to any of the questions. If I said anything that is hard or offensive, please yell at me. The comments expressed in this video are mine and not that of Dave or any previous or future guests. I don't know what else to say. Anyways, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.